Thank you very much. Hello and welcome everybody to the first talk of Bristol, Britain and Beyond. Kicking us off today is a discussion with Alyson Rudd with a kind of particular focus on football. I just want to, of course, say first, thank you very much to Ali for joining us on a match day when she's very busy, but hopefully you'll get a sense of Ali being, I suppose, in the thick of it. And off to work soon, or in the middle of work, indeed. Alyson Rudd, in case you haven't looked her up beforehand, is an award-winning sports writer and journalist at the Times. A qualified referee and football coach, Alyson has reported on some of the world's greatest sporting events, including the Olympics, though has a particular focus in her journalism for football. Flexing her writerly muscles too, Alyson has written her debut novel, which was published in 2019, the first time Lauren Paling died, and much to the delight of her fans, she has her second novel coming up, which is out next month, which is 11 Lines to Somewhere. I'm sure everyone will be looking forward to that and looking forward to more after hearing it from her today. So thank you, Ali, for joining us. I just wanted to kind of, I suppose, best place is to start with sort of your own journey into sports journalism. I understand you began in business journalism. What motivated you to enter the world of sport, and how did you go about doing that?
You can actually earn a living doing something you loved. So there were two things I loved growing up. One was writing. I knew I wanted to earn a living from writing, and I loved sport. But it didn't occur to me until I was writing about money matters that actually, wouldn't it be nice if I was writing about something I cared about? So I was faking it a bit. I'd be writing opinion pieces about the Financial Services Act and claiming that it was, this mattered to me. And I was fibbing, really. It didn't matter to me. And so I thought, right, I'm gonna leave financial journalism. I'm gonna go into sports journalism. And everyone said, oh, you can't do that. You can't change. You're in a little box now. That was red rag to a bull to me. I don't like being told you can't do something. So my route in was really unorthodox. And anyone who's listening who is thinking, oh, I want to break into sport, I wonder how she did it. You can't do it the way I did it. I'll explain how, because it's just very good. But I think what it does illustrate is if you want something enough, you can get it, and that you're really not going to get a job like being a sports journalist unless you have dedication and passion for it. There's just too many people who want to do it. I mean, it's just not enough to be talented at it. There's got to be something really driving you. So in order to break out of my box, I think I was rather cunning. There was a regular feature back in the day in the Observer newspaper. They would do a Christmas auction, a charity auction, and they would let readers bid for things that you cannot buy. So like having tea in the House of Commons with a minister, something you wouldn't be able to buy, but you might bid a lot of money for, and then that money would go to the Observer's nominated charity. And one of the items was meet the Liverpool team in the players' lounge after a game. So I thought, well, if I bid for that, if I win the bid, I can then write a piece about what it was like to meet my heroes. And I thought, right, that's all I need is one piece to prove that I can write about football. So I got my best friend at the time, Susan, and we actually calculated what could be a winning bid. We even thought about things like how many Liverpool fans might read the Observer, so that we were limiting the pool of people we were up against. Anyway, we won the bid. And before I set off, I phoned the Observer and said, I've won the bid. I am a journalist. Would you like me to write a piece about what it was like to meet my heroes? And I phoned the sports desk, and they said, oh, no. Our chief sports writer wouldn't like that. I'll pass you over to features. So I spoke to the features editor, and she said, that sounds fantastic. Met the players. Sadly, Liverpool lost, so it wasn't such a great vibe in the room. But anyway, I still wrote a piece. I filed the piece. Bear in mind, everyone, this is my first piece about sport, national paper. And I got a phone call saying, oh, it's very nice, but a man could have written it. And I realised I'd been pitched to what used to be the women's section. Believe it or not, there used to be a women's section in the features section of the Observer. So my heart sank, and I thought, oh, they're not going to print it because it's not girly enough, or I don't know what they thought I'd do, write about how handsome they were or something, I don't know. But they said, it's okay, well, we will print it. So that was my first piece, and off the back of that, and also my financial writing, I got lucky. The Independent on Sunday, someone went on holiday for a month, and they said I could write a column in their space about 4 different sports each week. And then the person came back off holiday and they said bye. But then I had 5 pieces. So I sent those to the Times, and they allowed me to go to matches. And then, and then slowly I became who I am now.
Wow, it's like a really sensational pitch. You know, really far beforehand and get into them. As you mentioned, there are people on the call from the sports section, you know, who are willing to and wanting to be sports journalists. What, now that you are the person who you are, what's a kind of typical day for Alyson Rudd as a sports writer?
There is no such thing as a typical day at all, which is the joy of the job. So if you're somebody who likes your hours set and needs to know what they're going to do, this is not the job for you, because there are 2 well, okay, I can only talk about myself. So I am supposed to do the things I do are I contribute to the Times football podcast. I contribute to Times Radio. I have a column that I write every week in the Sunday Times on football. It's a football column. I'm expected to produce interviews across all sports and features across all sports for the Times in the week. I also cover football matches, which can be a match report, or it can be a colour or analysis piece about a match. I can react. One thing I really like doing actually is reacting to a piece of news. So something might happen in sport, and they'll say, "Oh, Alyson, can you write a piece saying what this means? Tell us what this means. Is this important, or what's controversial about it?" And often or maybe someone's retired, or someone's died, or something. And because if you were to press me and say, what skills, what you cleverest at, it's writing well quickly. So I quite like that. I'm an adrenaline junkie, so I quite like that pressure of having to formulate an intelligent opinion, express it well within a couple of hours. So you can't really plan your week. Everything I've just described, you can't really plan your week around. Yes, I might be told what match I'm covering, and I might be told which podcast I'm doing next, but everything else is a bit up in the air, because I'm always putting out calls to people saying, "Oh, I'd love to interview you," but I don't know when they'll come back to me. So, you know, they quite often they'll say, "Oh, can you interview this person at 10 o'clock on Wednesday?" Well, you say yes, don't you? And often what happens is you might take a week's holiday, but you don't tell the world you're on holiday. You don't, do you? So I might be on holiday for as long as the desk think I'm on holiday, but then that doesn't stop a football manager says, "Oh, he can speak to you at this time." I'm not going to say, "Oh, but I'm on holiday." You do it, because they don't know they're being rude and calling you on your holiday. So you're sort of always working, but because it's sport, it doesn't feel like you're always working. So, and it's a bit weird in lockdown, because they're showing all the matches on telly. You can't avoid, you know, you sort of watch every single game that there is. So it's more of a vocation than a job. It's a lifestyle, and you sort of, I've got friends who do jobs where they know where they're going to be for the next few weeks, and they find it quite frustrating that I'll say, "I might be able to go for a walk then, but I might not."
Yeah. So you kind of have to fully embrace it, I suppose, and be on sort of the whole time in a way. You mentioned the variety of things that you do there, and the variety of columns and stuff that you write, and interacting with news and responding to that. When it comes to covering matches specifically, this might sound like a silly question to you perhaps, but how dependent is your coverage on the result of the game? Are you praying that every game is a sort of 5-4 game scoreline with a sort of last minute winner, or how do you cover a 0-0? How do you make that exciting quickly, as you said?
Well, as you know, 0-0s can be exciting. If you think they can't, then you don't know your football. It varies enormously from game to game, and it depends on the level of game and what's at stake as well. So I'm trying to give a recent example. Like on Thursday night, there was Tottenham v Chelsea, which was billed as, a mouth-watering encounter between the special one who used to manage Chelsea and a brand new manager to the Premier League, and what would be the outcome. And as a journalist, and probably any fan watching, you pretty quickly realise that Spurs were not going to contribute to the excitement of this, and it was not going to be a thriller. And so what you do is, as the writers, you buy into the narrative early on and make the most of that narrative. So you really go for the jugular and how negative Jose Mourinho's being, and then you analyse what it is that the new manager is doing, and why he's picked certain players, why certain players are doing well in certain positions, and this doesn't always happen, Teddy, but sometimes that a goal is going to ruin your narrative. So in that game, Spurs getting a late equaliser, or even getting 2 quick goals at the end, would have completely ruined my first edition piece, because I was writing them off. But that just comes from experience, that you find a way that, should that happen, you would hope you've picked up that it could happen because of a change in formation or personnel, and you allow that possibility within your writing. But the mechanics of producing a report is there'll be one version that goes up on the whistle and goes out to people who get the first edition of the paper abroad, and then you can rewrite it. So most people don't read the piece that was written under pressure very quickly anyway. You do get a chance to, within an hour, rewrite it and incorporate whatever the managers might have said as well, if you want to do that.
Yeah. It sounds really interesting. It sounds like you're sort of writing, well before the game, and reading, looking at the club.
No, you should never do that. You should never write before the game.
Thinking of that narrative.
Prepare.
Yeah.
You can prepare, absolutely, and think of themes, and think of players that are more interesting than others. And then but you really do have to be able to dump all that if something else happens.
Yeah. You
can't cling to your idea, your great idea pre-kickoff, if it's just not manifesting. You have to adapt, dump it, throw it away, and go with what you see.
Yeah. I'm moving away from football as well, just to open it up a bit. You've obviously covered, I believe, is it 2 Olympics, possibly 3?
Two, I think.
Brilliant. London and Rio, I believe.
Yeah.
What has been what's been the most significant sporting sort of moment that you've seen or observed that kind of really stands in your memory, and why, if there is one?
Getting to grips with track cycling was a big deal. I went to a few championships before 2012 to get used to it. I tell you what track cycling is like. It's like reading Shakespeare, because when you open Shakespeare, it's all gobbledygook. But if you persevere, you end up reading it as if it's your natural language. And track cycling was like that. You sit down and look at it and you think, I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what's going on. And it's just bizarre. Races can last 90 seconds. You think, how am I going to get a narrative out of 90 seconds of sport? But as you immerse yourself and get to know because you get quite a lot of access in sports like that. So I got to know all the leading personalities. Well, I say get to know, I got to interview them, people like Laura Trott and so on. And they're very, they're really chatty. After, they'll talk to you within 5 minutes of coming off the track and either failing or winning. It's great access. And you just, by immersing yourself and sort of talking to people who've done track cycling all their life, and if they're kind enough to tell you what's going on, then you learn it, and then you're sort of invested emotionally, so that when you're there for their Olympic glory, you feel it well enough to be able to write about it honestly, as though it matters to you as well. Because the funny part of media Olympic coverage is, the honest truth is, most senior writers don't cover those sports every week. They cover them once every 4 years. So you will find yourself running, being told literally to run. We think there might be a British medal in something obscure that person knows nothing about, whether it's gymnastics or the trampolining or whatever. And so you will find there are a group of people, a mixture of people in the press box. Some are specialists, really know their stuff, and so, some have done a bit of work on it, but wouldn't call themselves specialists, but know the background. And some people for whom they are writing a big piece and it's their first ever foray into the sport. So the other sport I really got into was gymnastics. And I remember a guy sat next to me, and it was the first time he'd ever been at the gymnastics, and he was nudging and nudging and nudging. He didn't know what anything was called. He was going, "What's that?" Asking, "What do you mean, what's that?" He's saying, "That thing, what is he on?" I said, "That's called the floor." I mean, it was pretty obvious, the floor exercise. Oh, right, okay. I mean, so it's all very frantic and exciting and slightly ludicrous at times as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a way where people are teaching themselves as you go along, and you have to learn and adapt quite quickly.
Definitely.
Is there a scoop that for you as a journalist you're particularly proud of that, something that you broke perhaps, or?
The most, I mean, I had a load of exclusive interviews, and they're always nice to get when someone chooses you when they're important and they think, "Oh, we'll go with Alyson." That's quite nice. But the most interesting exclusive I had was when Paula Radcliffe was, the leading female athlete in Britain. She winning Sports Personality of the Year, and everyone hoping she could win an Olympics. She was pregnant, and she wanted to give that story to someone who would understand that a woman doesn't have to give up being an elite athlete just because they're having a baby. She was very worried about how it would be reported that she was having a baby, because she still had titles to win. So I had that as an exclusive. And in order to handle it properly, we put out a fake front page. So, when they read the headlines on the 10:30 news, they say, oh, they get a facsimile of the front page of the Mirror and the Guardian and so on. We put out a fake front page so that nobody could run a quick story about it. When my piece was talked about with the subs, the people who go through it for accuracy on the desk, they did it in a bunker so that no one could overhear them talking. Wow. So we pulled it off. We had the front page, back page, inside spread. And it was more interesting than you might think, actually, because if you're an elite athlete and you're pregnant, when you have doping, your results come through. They look like you're on drugs or something. Your results come out wrong. So she didn't want to have to tell UK Athletics or anyone that she was pregnant, but she had to, because they were saying, "Oh, what are you taking, Paul? Your results are weird." And obviously how you train when you're pregnant. Anyway, it was all very fascinating. And the only time I've had a fake front page, actually. They're not very common at all. But then I've been thinking about that story, because I also, a couple of weeks ago, that baby in her tummy that I wrote about, she'd had a very rare cancer. And I met her for the first time with, she'd had chemo, so she had no hair. And she was telling me about how she got over her tumour. So it was a very moving story, actually, to be there with Paula when she was pregnant with Isla, her daughter, and then talking to Isla about overcoming cancer, and because she wanted the world to know what to look out for this particular cancer. So it was like a strange full circle story, because I think I'd interviewed in the intervening period. I'd only interviewed Paula about 2 or 3 times, so it was was interesting how these things, so basically Paula remembered how well we handled that story, and she wanted us to do the same thing again.
She trusted you.
Yeah. That's the other element of the job. You don't still run around trying to get exclusives and shafting people. You have to build relationships, because a lot of people stay in sport for years and years, especially managers. And look at Roy Hodgson, he's 73. You can't, and he doesn't talk to certain journalists who weren't very nice to him 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They do remember who are people who are honourable. So I get a lot of stories and interviews from people who just remember as being quite nice, actually.
Yeah, so that kind of quick sensational story can actually really work against you in the long run. It might be good for
absolutely
the short term.
Yeah, or if you mishandle something.
Sure, got it. You mentioned, of course, the pandemic, can't really escape it at the moment. Hopefully we'll be out of it soon-ish. It's obviously affected all our lives and livelihoods. How has it impacted, if at all, your work as a sports writer and a writer?
Well, I think I'm probably quite lucky. They are letting journalists into stadiums. They're only letting one journalist per paper, normally for a big game. So the most recent one was the Spurs Chelsea game. I would have gone to that alongside the chief football writer and another reporter from the Times, but they're only letting one person in at a time. So unless you're doing the match report, you have to do anything else from your home. So I'm getting a mix, and that's quite nice. I'm getting a mix of going to games, and you do see it differently if you're there. I mean, you really do. You get a different sense of tactics and shape, and because the stadiums are empty, you really notice what the coaching staff do and what the manager is shouting and so on. So it's good to go, but it also means, because every game is on telly, you can still contribute. So I did that piece on Spurs and Chelsea from my living room, which isn't ideal, but as long as you're getting that mix of being there and not there. And they're doing all the press conferences are on Zoom. That's surreal. So I can be at a match and I can be 15 feet away from the manager, but I'm not allowed to ask him a question. That has to be done via Zoom. So that all feels slightly, and the Zoom isn't very good. And they usually got the mowers out on the lawn and it's terrible. But you, yeah, that part's not very nice. It's much better to be able to talk face to face to a manager after a game, and a player indeed.
Sounds good. Yeah, lots of cheers. I'll just move on to a question from Eddie, because it's nice to have that sort of audience interaction. But we've had Eddie, in fact, is our sports editor. He said lots of newspapers have former players and athletes as journalists. How do you go about, and pundits as well, I suppose, how do you go about showing that you are just or as more capable than them when it comes to reporting on their own sport?
Well, they can't write very well, you see. So what tends to happen is very few, some, when Alan Smith, the former Arsenal striker, had a column in the Telegraph, he wrote that himself because he went to journalism school. But very few do that. Most famous names who contribute to papers, what happens is they will have, sometimes they don't even have the idea. The idea has to come from the desk, but they might have the idea and then they'll talk it through on the phone, and then someone ghosts it for them. So they'll get the big photograph and they'll get the big headline, but the crafting of the piece is most of the time done by a journalist. So you couldn't, and those people tend not to do those, what we call runners. So you're doing a football match and you have to file on the whistle. So you file copy at half-time, three-quarter time, and on the whistle. So you're writing very quickly under pressure and hopefully well. There just aren't any former players who do that. They don't want to do that. They don't need to do that. What you're buying from them is their name and their opinion. The crafting of that opinion comes from a journalist anyway. So you don't have to prove you're better than them. You just work alongside them, and it's a sort of a team. It's a balance of famous names and writers, I suppose.
Yeah, I won't get you to name and shame some poor football writers, but or some poor footballers who then went into writing. But going on to quality writers such as yourself, they say everyone has a novel in them, and you now have two. What was it like? Well, first of all, when did you realise that you really wanted to write your first novel, the first time Laura Palin died? And what's it like now being, I suppose, a sports journalist and a novelist?
Well, I thought that would be weird, and it's not. Everyone seems to think it's perfectly natural, so that's quite nice. And my colleagues, they're not dismissive of it. In fact, they're quite, oh, we wish we could do that. So it's quite lovely. So it's not a problem juggling the two things at all. I feel slightly embarrassed, Teddy, that I didn't do this years and years ago. But I mean, I did write nonfiction first. And then, because that's quite easy. The process of writing and getting published, it's much easier to get nonfiction published, actually. There's my tip. If you've got a good nonfiction idea and you're prepared to put in the effort to put all the facts together well, then, you know, I mean, I've had people begging me to write more nonfiction, and I haven't wanted to. I've said no, because I've said, no, the next thing I want to do is fiction. But that's really hard. It's just a much more of a closed shop, and there are famous exceptions, but 98% of the time you have to find a good agent. Finding a good agent is really hard. They don't, you know, they get submissions all the time. It's really hard. You have to find a good agent, and then that agent has to then sell you to a publisher, and they're really picky as well. So it's not even just about having the ability to write a novel. It's about finding a way into the system to get published. So it was really quite time consuming. And actually, I got a good agent because I write about sport, believe it or not, because my literary agent follows me on Twitter. And occasionally, I didn't know who he was, but this chap who followed me on Twitter would occasionally comment on how I'd written a report, because he's a Spurs fan. And his Twitter handle had the word agent in it. And I said to him, this might be a bit weird, but can I send you a manuscript? Now, if anyone else had said that, like just some random person, he might have said yes or no, but he probably wouldn't have read it. But he was already reading me because he read me in the Times. So that gave me this massive advantage over all the thousands of people who've got novels in them and that might be absolutely brilliant novels, but they can't quite get that foot in the door.
Yeah, it sounds like as well, sort of to come full circle, that you asking him and messaging him is sort of the same as you asking for that sort of first feature, you know, and it's still driving you there and then, you know, you're kind of constantly pushing to have your work out there. The difference, of course, now is that, you know, you had that writing beforehand, as you say. We'll let you go now because it's 3 o'clock and I'm sure you have some games to watch, but just thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Can I just ask you quick yes or no? It'd be criminal of me not to ask is, do you think Liverpool can win the league this season? I know you're a big Liverpool fan, so.
Well, I think they can. I'm not sure they will.
That'll be good. Sure. There you go. Brilliant punditry from Alyson Rudd. Thank you so much. much appreciated. And yeah, cool. We can let you go. Just to let everyone know about the rest of the week, as we said, this is the first talk for our Bristol, Britain and Beyond festival, online festival series of talks. Tomorrow we'll be having Professor Stephen Lewandowski, Bristol University's own Professor Stephen Lewandowski, who will talk through disinformation and conspiracy theories. Tuesday, a talk with Ida Vok, the New Statesman international correspondent. I won't go through